The notification chimed on my phone just as I was pulling my famous apple pie from the oven. David's voice filled my kitchen with words that would change everything. I can't stand this useless old hag anymore. Soon she'll be taking her final nap and will be spending all her money in Paris. My blood turned to ice as I realized he'd accidentally sent me a voice message meant for his wife, Claire. Without hesitation, I picked up my phone and made one call. Put our plan into action. I'm Margaret Thompson, 64 years old, and until 30 seconds ago, I believed my son David loved me. I'd spent the morning baking his favorite pie for his visit tomorrow, humming old songs while flour dusted my kitchen counter. Now I stood frozen, holding my phone like it was a poisonous snake. The message had been brief but devastatingly clear. David's voice thick with irritation, complaining to Claire about having to visit the old hag again. How they were both tired of pretending to care. How they'd already picked out the Parisian hotel where they'd celebrate once I was gone. My hands didn't shake as I replayed the message. 3 years of widowhood had taught me that the people who claim to love you most are often the ones plotting your demise. But this was my own son. I walked to my kitchen window, looking out at the garden where my late husband Robert had planted roses every spring. Well, honey, I whispered to his memory, looks like it's time to use that plan we talked about. The plan Robert and I had discussed it during his final months when cancer was winning, and we both knew it. Maggie, he'd said, holding my hand in his hospital bed, people change when money's involved, even family. Promise me you'll protect yourself. I'd promised, though I never imagined I'd need to use our contingency plan against my own children. Now I dialed the number I'd memorized, but hoped never to use. James Morrison, estate attorney, and Robert's old friend answered on the second ring. Margaret, is everything all right, Jim? Remember that conversation we had in July about the special provisions Robert wanted in place? There was a pause. Are you saying it's time? It's time. I'll make the calls. Everything will be in motion by morning. After hanging up, I looked around my kitchen. The pie sat cooling on the counter, golden and perfect. Tomorrow, David would arrive expecting his loving, gullible mother to serve him dessert, and probably ask for another small loan to help with his mortgage. Instead, he was going to discover that this old hag had been 3 steps ahead of him all along. My phone buzzed again, a text from Claire this time. Looking forward to tomorrow. David, can't wait for your famous pie. I smiled for the first time since hearing that message. Oh, sweetheart, I thought. Neither of you has any idea what's coming. I should have seen the signs earlier, but grief has a way of making you ignore red flags. The changes in David started subtle. Missed phone calls, canceled visits, and a sudden interest in my finances and future planning. But looking back now, every interaction over the past 6 months had been leading to this moment. It began right after Robert's funeral when David pulled me aside at the reception. Mom, you know Claire and I are here for you, he'd said, his arm around my shoulders. But this house is so big for just one person. Have you thought about downsizing? I'd brushed it off as concern. Sweet David worried about his aging mother rattling around in a 4-bedroom colonial. How thoughtful. Then came the visits that felt more like inspections. Claire would comment on the antique furniture, the original hardwood floors, the charming old fixtures that could be updated beautifully. David would nod along, asking casual questions about property values and inheritance taxes. Last month, they'd brought brochures, glossy pamphlets for senior living communities with names like Sunset Manor and Golden Years Estates, places where I could enjoy my retirement without the burden of home maintenance. Look at these activities, Claire had gushed, pointing to photos of elderly people doing watercolor painting and chair yoga. You'd make so many friends. The kicker came 3 weeks ago when David suggested I meet with his financial advisor friend. Just to make sure your nest egg is properly managed, Mom. You don't want to outlive your money. Outlive my money. As if I was some doddering fool who couldn't balance a checkbook. I'd been managing our finances for 37 years of marriage while Robert focused on his dental practice. Now I understood their urgency. They weren't worried about my finances. They were worried about accessing them. I pulled out the folder I kept in my desk drawer, the one labeled Important Documents. Inside were copies of everything. My will, Robert's life insurance policy, property deeds, and investment accounts. Everything David and Claire thought they knew about. What they didn't know was that Robert and I had been planning for this possibility since his diagnosis. People get strange around death and money, Robert had warned me during one of his chemo treatments. Even family, especially family. He'd insisted we set up protections, trust funds, legal mechanisms, and fail-safes that would activate if anyone tried to take advantage of me. At the time, I'd thought he was being paranoid. Now I realized he'd been prescient. My phone rang. Sarah, my daughter. "Hi, Mom, how are you holding up?" Sarah's voice carried the same artificial concern I'd been hearing from David, but somehow it felt different, rehearsed. "I'm fine, honey. Actually, David's coming over tomorrow." "Oh," Sarah sounded surprised. "He didn't mention that when we talked yesterday." "Interesting." So my children had been discussing me behind my back. "Sarah, can I ask you something? Have you and David been talking about my living situation?" Silence then, carefully. "We're just worried about you, Mom. Being alone in that big house managing everything by yourself." There it was, the same script David had been reading from. "I see. And I suppose you both have suggestions for what I should do." "Well," Sarah's voice grew smaller, "there are some really nice communities where you could have help when you need it, but still maintain your independence." Independence. They kept using that word, but what they meant was the opposite. After I hung up, I sat in Robert's old recliner, the one I'd kept exactly as he'd left it. Even my daughter was in on it, both my children circling like vultures, waiting for their inheritance. Tomorrow's visit was going to be very educational for all of us. The morning arrived crisp and clear, perfect for what I had planned. At exactly 900 a.m., my doorbell rang. I opened it to find David and Claire standing on my porch, both wearing the kinds of smiles you see at funeral homes, sympathetic but slightly impatient. "Mom." David wrapped me in a hug that felt rehearsed. "You look wonderful." Claire stepped forward with a bouquet of grocery store flowers. "These are for you, Margaret. David told me how much you love daisies." I'd been allergic to daisies for 20 years, but I thanked her anyway. Some battles weren't worth fighting yet. Come in, I've got coffee ready." They settled into my living room, and I noticed how their eyes wandered, cataloging, appraising. Claire's gaze lingered on my grandmother's china cabinet. David studied the family photos like he was memorizing which ones he'd keep. "So, Mom," David began, after we'd exhausted the weather as a topic, "Claire and I have been thinking about your situation here." My situation. Well, being alone, managing this big house, handling all the responsibilities. I poured coffee with steady hands. "What responsibilities are those, David?" He exchanged a glance with Claire. "The yard work, maintenance, grocery shopping, managing your medications." "I don't take any medications except vitamins." "Right. But as you get older, I'm 64, not 94. Claire leaned forward with that practiced sympathy face. "Of course you're still young and capable, Margaret, but wouldn't it be nice to have help? To live somewhere where you don't have to worry about anything, like where they'd brought new brochures, shinier ones this time, with higher price points, and words like luxury and resort-style living." "Look at this one," David said, spreading the glossiest pamphlet across my coffee table. "Millbrook Estates. It's got a golf course, 3 restaurants, and they handle everything. Cleaning, cooking, even transportation to appointments." I studied the brochure. The monthly fee started at $8,000. This looks expensive. "That's the beauty of it," Claire said, her eyes lighting up. "You'd sell this house and the proceeds would cover years of living there worry-free." Ah, there it was. Sell the house and what happens to the money when I die? Another glance between them. "Well," David said carefully, "whatever's left would go to your beneficiaries as outlined in your will." "I see. And you've read my will." "Not read it exactly, but we know the basics. Sarah and I inherit everything equally right. That's what you and Dad always told us." I set down my coffee cup. "Actually, that's changed. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Changed?" Claire's voice cracked slightly. "How do you mean? I mean, I've updated my will several times actually since your father died." David's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Mom, you should have discussed major financial decisions with us. We could have helped you understand the implications." "Oh, I understand the implications perfectly." I stood up and walked to my desk, pulling out a thick manila envelope. In fact, I have copies right here if you'd like to review them. Claire was gripping her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. Margaret, surely you don't need to make any drastic changes. Your original will was perfectly reasonable. Drastic? I raised an eyebrow. Interesting word choice. David stood up abruptly. Mom, I think we should all take a step back here. You're clearly upset about something and making permanent legal changes when your emotional isn't wise. Emotional? I almost laughed. David, I haven't felt this clear-headed in years. My phone chose that moment to ring. James Morrison, right on schedule. Excuse me, I said, answering. Margaret Thompson speaking. Mrs. Thompson, this is James Morrison. I'm calling to confirm that all the documents we discussed have been filed and executed as of this morning. Everything is now legally binding and in effect. I made sure my voice carried clearly across the room. Thank you, Jim. I'm so glad we were able to implement my late husband's protection plan. After I hung up, the silence stretched like a taut wire. Protection plan. David's voice was carefully controlled. What kind of protection plan? I smiled, settling back into my chair. The kind that activates when someone tries to take advantage of a vulnerable widow. And that's when I played his voice message. The color drained from David's face as his own voice filled the living room. I can't stand this useless old hag anymore. Soon she'll be taking her final nap and will be spending all her money in Paris. Claire's gasp was audible. She stared at her husband like she'd never seen him before, though I suspected she'd been part of the conversation. When the message ended, the silence stretched so long I could hear my grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Mom, I can explain. David started. I kept my voice pleasant, conversational. Because I'm very interested to hear how you explain discussing my death as an inconvenience that's taking too long. That's not what I meant. I was frustrated talking to Claire about worrying about you living alone. It came out wrong. Claire found her voice. It was taken completely out of context, Margaret. David's been so stressed about your well-being. My well-being, I repeated the word slowly. Tell me, when exactly did you book the trip to Paris? The question hung in the air like smoke. David's eyes darted to Claire, who had suddenly become fascinated with her manicure. We haven't booked anything, David said finally. I pulled out my phone and showed them a screenshot. This is from Claire's Instagram, posted 3 days ago. Can't wait for our romantic Paris getaway. Finally booked the hotel we've been dreaming about. Claire's face went through several interesting color changes. That's for our anniversary next year. Your anniversary is in March. This post talks about a September trip next month. David sat down heavily, running his hands through his hair. Okay. Yes, we booked a trip, but it's not what you think. What I think I interrupted is that you've been planning to celebrate my death with a vacation. What I think is that you've been pushing me toward expensive senior living to drain my assets faster. What I think is that I raised a son who sees his mother as an obstacle to his inheritance. That's not fair. David's voice rose. Do you know what it's like watching your mother live alone, knowing something could happen to her? Do you know the stress we've been under, the stress you've been under? I stood up, feeling anger coursing through my veins like electricity. The stress of wondering when I'll die so you can spend my money. Claire started crying. Real tears or performance tears with her, it was hard to tell. Margaret, please. We love you. We're worried about you. Maybe we've handled it badly, but our hearts are in the right place. Your hearts are in my bank account. David stood up too, his face flushed. Fine. You want honesty? Yes, we're concerned about your finances. Yes, we've made some plans based on what we thought our inheritance would be. Yes, we think you're too stubborn to admit you need help, but that doesn't mean we don't love you. Doesn't it, Mom, be reasonable? We're family. Family takes care of each other. Dad would have wanted us to look out for you. Your father did want you to look out for me. That's why he made sure I'd be protected from you. David's face twisted. Protected from us? We're your children. And yet here you are, plotting my demise over voice messages you thought I'd never hear. Claire wiped her eyes with a tissue. What does this protection plan mean exactly? I smiled, pulling the legal documents from their envelope. It means that as of this morning, everything has changed. My will, my trusts, my beneficiaries, all of it updated, based on a contingency plan your father and I established before he died. Contingency plan for what David demanded, for this exact situation, for the possibility that grief and greed might make my children forget that I'm a person, not just a payout. I spread the documents across the coffee table. Would you like to read the new terms, or shall I summarize? David grabbed the paper, scanning frantically. As he read, his face went from red to pale to gray. This can't be legal, he whispered. Oh, it's perfectly legal. Your father made sure of that. Claire was reading over his shoulder now, her tears forgotten. What does it say? David's voice was hollow when he answered. It says we get nothing. Nothing, Claire's voice cracked. Nothing, I confirmed cheerfully. Every asset, every account, every penny. It all goes to charity if either of my children attempts to manipulate, coerce, or take advantage of me in any way. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, David looked up at me, his eyes blazing. You can't do this. We have rights. What rights are those exactly? We're your family. You deserve exactly what you've earned, I said calmly. And based on today's conversation, that appears to be nothing. Claire stood up abruptly. This is insane. We're leaving. Good idea, I agreed. And Claire, you might want to cancel that Paris trip. After they left, I sat in my quiet house for the first time in hours, letting the silence wash over me like a cleansing bath. My hands weren't shaking anymore. My heart wasn't racing. For the first time since Robert's death, I felt completely in control. My phone rang within 20 minutes. Sarah, Mom, David just called me. David, he's furious. He says you've cut him and Claire out of your will completely. David says a lot of things, doesn't he? Did he also tell you about the voice message he accidentally sent me? Silence. Then carefully. What voice message? I played it for her, too. When it finished, Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Mom, I had no idea David felt that way about you, didn't you? Because he mentioned that you two had discussed my living situation quite thoroughly. Another pause. We've talked about our concerns. Yes, but I would never refer to you that way. What way, Sarah? Like you're a burden, like we're waiting for you to die. I leaned back in my chair. Aren't you? Mom? Sarah sounded genuinely shocked. How can you even ask that? Because for the past 6 months, both of my children have been pushing me toward expensive assisted living, asking about my finances and making plans that assume I won't be around much longer. What exactly am I supposed to think? We're worried about you. You're living alone in a house that's too big for you. You never go anywhere. You don't date. I'm a widow, Sarah. I lost the love of my life. Forgive me if I'm not ready to sign up for ballroom dancing classes and singles mixers. Sarah's voice softened. I know, Mom. I know how much you love Dad, but he wouldn't want you to stop living. I haven't stopped living. I've simply started living on my own terms instead of everyone else's expectations. But the will stands. Both you and David have shown me exactly how much I can trust you with my future. The answer is not at all. Mom, please. I understand why you're upset with David. That message was horrible. But I've never said anything like that about you. I've never wished you would die so I could inherit your money. She was right. Sarah had never been as crude as David. She'd simply been his accomplice. Sarah, when David suggested I move to assisted living, what did you tell him? A long pause. I said I thought it might be a good idea for your safety and social life. And when he talked about managing my finances, I said, maybe we should encourage you to be more conservative with your investments. Conservative meaning what? Meaning more accessible, easier to manage when you're too old to manage them yourself. Mom, you're putting words in my mouth. Am I? Or am I finally hearing the words you've been dancing around for months? Sarah started crying then. I love you, Mom. I do. But I also have children to think about. College tuitions, mortgage payments. I thought having a better understanding of our future inheritance would help us plan better. There it was, the truth wrapped in pretty paper. But still the truth. Your future inheritance, I repeated. Not my present life, but your future windfall. That's not fair. Fair, I almost laughed. Sarah Fair would have been my children visiting me because they missed me, not because they wanted to assess my assets. Fair would have been phone calls asking how I'm feeling, not how I'm managing my money. We do care how you're feeling. No, you care how long you think I have left. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Finally, Sarah spoke again, her voice small. What happens now? Now you both learn to love me for who I am, not what I'm worth. Or you learn to live without either. The will is final. The trust documents are filed. The protection plan is in effect. If either of you makes any further attempts to manipulate my living situation, my finances, or my decisions, every penny goes to charity. Mom, you can't mean that. I've never meant anything more in my life. After I hung up, I walked to my kitchen and looked at David's pie still sitting on the counter where I'd left it that morning. It had been his favorite since he was 7 years old. I'd made it with love, anticipating his smile when he tasted it. Now it felt like a monument to my own foolishness. I picked up the pie and walked outside to my garden. The compost bin was near the back fence next to Robert's roses. As I dumped the perfect pie into the organic waste, I felt something shift inside me. The old Margaret would have saved the pie, would have wrapped it carefully, and saved it for the next visit, hoping things would improve, would have made excuses for her children's behavior, and blamed herself for misunderstanding their intentions. The new Margaret was done making excuses for people who saw her as a walking inheritance. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mrs. Thompson, this is James Morrison's assistant. Mr. Morrison wanted me to confirm that all documents were properly filed with the court today. The new provisions are legally binding as of 4:00 p.m. this afternoon. I texted back, perfect timing, thank you. As I walked back toward the house, I noticed my neighbor Helen working in her garden. She waved and called out, "Everything all right over there, Margaret? I saw David and Claire leave in quite a hurry." "Everything's wonderful, Helen," I called back. "In fact, I think things are finally exactly as they should be." 3 days passed without a word from either of my children. On the fourth day, my doorbell rang at 7 a.m. David stood on my porch looking like he hadn't slept in a week. "Mom, we need to talk." I was in my bathrobe, coffee mug in hand, completely unprepared for drama this early. "It's 7:00 in the morning, David. I've been up all night thinking about what you said about the will, about the protection plan, about everything." He looked genuinely distressed, which was either very good acting or actual remorse. With David, it was hard to tell the difference. "Would you like to come in?" He followed me to the kitchen where I poured him coffee without being asked. "Old habits. Mom, I want to apologize. Really apologize. Not just try to get back in your good graces." I sat across from him at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd fed him breakfast every morning for 18 years. "I'm listening." That voice message, hearing myself say those things about you, it made me sick. Not because you heard it, but because I actually said it in the first place. He wrapped his hands around his coffee mug like he was trying to warm something frozen inside himself. "Claire and I have been struggling financially for months. My commission at the real estate office is down 60% from last year. We've got the mortgage, car payments, credit card debt, and yes, we started thinking about your inheritance as a solution to our problems." At least he was being honest. We convinced ourselves we were worried about you. But really, we were worried about us. About how long we could keep up appearances before everything fell apart. "David." No, let me finish. "When I called you a useless old hag, when I talked about you dying like it was an overdue library book, that wasn't frustration talking. That was desperation and greed. And I'm ashamed of myself." He looked up at me with eyes that reminded me of the little boy who used to confess to breaking my vases. "I know I can't undo what I said. I know I can't take back the months of treating you like a problem to be solved instead of a person to be loved. But I want to try to make this right. How, I don't know. I was hoping you could tell me." I studied my son's face, looking for signs of manipulation, practiced remorse, calculated strategy. All I saw was exhaustion and what looked like genuine regret. "David, do you remember when you were 12 and you stole $20 from my purse to buy comic books?" He nodded, looking confused by the change of subject. "Do you remember what your punishment was? You made me return the comics and do extra chores to earn back the $20. And what did I tell you about trust?" His voice was quiet, that it's easy to break and hard to rebuild. Exactly. You didn't just steal money from me, David. You stole my peace of mind. You made me question whether I could trust my own children to love me without ulterior motives. I know. Do you? Because the way you and Claire look at this house, at my furniture, at my jewelry, it's not with appreciation or memories. It's with appraisal eyes, like you're already dividing up the spoils. David flinched. You're right. And Sarah, she may not have said the words you did, but she's been just as eager to discuss my finances and my future living arrangements. Mom, what can I do to fix this? I leaned back in my chair, considering. I'm not sure you can, David. Trust isn't like a broken vase you can glue back together. Once it's shattered, there are always cracks. So that's it. I'm out of your life forever because of one horrible moment. One horrible moment. I raised an eyebrow. David, that voice message was just confirmation of what I'd been sensing for months. The subtle pressure to downsize the questions about my investment strategies. The concerned looks when I mentioned home repairs or travel plans. We were worried. You were calculating. There's a difference. David put his head in his hands. So what happens now? I lose my mother because I was stupid and greedy. You don't lose me because you were greedy, David. You lose my inheritance because you showed me I can't trust you with it. He looked up sharply. There's a difference. There could be. If you can prove to me that you value our relationship more than my bank account. How do I do that? I stood up and refilled my coffee cup, buying time to think. You start by accepting that the will isn't changing back, that the money is gone. The inheritance is off the table, and your mother is not a retirement plan. Okay? You start calling me because you miss me, not because you need something. You start visiting because you enjoy my company, not because you want to assess my competency. I can do that. And you start treating me like a person with my own wants and needs, not like a problem that needs managing. David was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Mom, what do you want? Not what we think you should want, but what you actually want. It was such a simple question, but no one had asked me in 3 years. I want to travel, I said, without thinking. I want to see Ireland and Scotland, places your father and I always planned to visit. I want to take a cooking class and learn to make real Italian pasta. I want to read books without feeling guilty about spending money on myself. David smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in months. Then why don't you, Because every time I mention travel or classes or spending money on experiences, you and Sarah start talking about fixed incomes and the importance of preserving capital. We were idiots. Yes, you were. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Then David asked, Is there any chance, any possibility at all that you might change your mind about the will? I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw something I hadn't seen in months. I saw the boy who used to bring me dandelion bouquets, who called me when he got his first job, who cried at his father's funeral, not just for his loss, but for mine. Ask me again in a year, I said, after you've shown me that you can love me without expecting anything in return. For the first time since that awful voice message, David smiled like he meant it. I can do that. We'll see, I said. But for the first time in days, I felt something that might have been hope. 2 weeks after David's tearful kitchen confession, Sarah showed up unannounced with a casserole and what she probably thought was a brilliant strategy. I watched through my window as she practiced her approach in the driveway, adjusting her expression from concerned daughter to loving caregiver. Hi, Mom, she chirped when I opened the door. I brought your favorite tuna noodle casserole. It hadn't been my favorite since 1987, but I let her in anyway. Sometimes you have to let people hang themselves with their own rope. How thoughtful, Sarah. What's the occasion? She bustled around my kitchen like she owned it, heating the casserole and setting my table with my own dishes. Can't a daughter just want to spend time with her mother? She can, but in my experience, daughters who show up with casseroles usually want something. Sarah's smile flickered. Mom, you've become so cynical lately. I prefer the term realistic. We sat down to eat her mediocre casserole, and I waited for the real reason for her visit. It came during dessert. I've been thinking about our conversation last week, she said, cutting into the store-bought pie she'd brought. About David's message and the will and everything. Have you? And I realized something. David was wrong to say those horrible things, but maybe we've all been approaching this wrong. I sipped my coffee and waited for her pitch. Instead of talking about your future care needs, maybe we should be talking about your present happiness. What would make you feel most fulfilled right now? Interesting. A different approach, but still an approach. What do you think would make me happy? Sarah. Well, you mentioned wanting to travel to take classes. Maybe instead of worrying about conserving money, you should be spending it on experiences. That's a remarkable change of opinion from someone who was concerned about my conservative investment strategy last month. Sarah's cheeks reddened. I was wrong about that. I let fear about the future prevent me from seeing your present needs. Fear of what exactly? Fear that you might outlive your money and we'd have to support you financially. Finally, some honesty. And now, I think that's our problem to worry about, not yours. You should live the life you want while you can. I leaned back in my chair, studying my daughter's face. She was better than David at manipulation. Actually, this approach was more sophisticated, more emotionally intelligent. Sarah, do you know what your father used to say about you? She shook her head. He said you were the most dangerous kind of smart. Smart enough to tell people what they wanted to hear so convincingly that they forgot to look at your real motives. Mom, it was meant as a compliment. Your father admired strategic thinking. I'm not being strategic, I'm being honest. Are you? Because this newfound support for my spending money, does it have anything to do with the fact that if I spend it all, there's nothing left for either of you to inherit? The will becomes irrelevant. That's not. I didn't. You didn't think I'd figure it out? Sarah put down her fork and looked at me with something approaching respect. Mom, you're scarier than I gave you credit for. I'm smarter than either of you gave me credit for. So what happens now? I smiled. Now you learn the same lesson David is learning, that I'm not a problem to be solved or a resource to be managed. I'm your mother, and I deserve better than manipulation disguised as concern. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked, is there any way back from this for either of us? There might be. But it starts with you accepting that you have no claim on my money, my decisions, or my future. None at all. And if we do that, then maybe we can rebuild a relationship based on something other than inheritance expectations. After Sarah left, I called James Morrison. How are you holding up Margaret better than I expected? But I need to ask you something. That protection plan Robert set up, was there more to it than just changing the will? James was quiet for a moment. What do you mean? I mean, did Robert anticipate that our children might try multiple strategies to manipulate me, Margaret? Maybe you should come to my office. There are some things we need to discuss in person. Something in his tone made my stomach clench. What kind of things? The kind that require privacy and documentation. Can you come tomorrow morning? After I hung up, I sat in my living room wondering what other surprises Robert had planned. My husband had always been 3 steps ahead of everyone else. It's what made him a successful dentist and a shrewd investor. But what else had he anticipated about our children's behavior? James Morrison's law office occupied the second floor of a restored Victorian downtown. I'd been there dozens of times over the years, but walking up those stairs the next morning felt different, more ominous. Margaret, thank you for coming. James hugged me like we were family, which in many ways we were after 30 years of friendship. He led me to his private office and closed the door. On his desk was a thick file labeled Thompson Family Trust, Confidential Provisions. Before we begin, he said, settling behind his desk, I need you to know that everything I'm about to show you was Robert's idea. He made me promise not to reveal these details unless specific triggers were met. What kind of triggers? Evidence that either of your children was attempting to manipulate or defraud you. My mouth went dry. Defraud? James opened the file and pulled out a stack of documents. Robert hired a private investigator 6 months before he died. He wanted to understand your family's true financial situation and motivations. What Margaret Robert loved your children, but he wasn't blind to their character flaws. He was particularly concerned about David's spending habits and Sarah's sense of entitlement. James spread several photographs across his desk, credit card statements, bank records, mortgage documents. David and Claire aren't just struggling financially, they're drowning. They've refinanced their house twice, maxed out 6 credit cards, and taken loans against David's 401k. They owe over $200,000 in consumer debt. I stared at the numbers, my head spinning. How did they hide this? Carefully. But Robert's investigator was thorough. He showed me more documents. Sarah and Tom aren't much better. They're carrying $150,000 in debt, mostly from trying to maintain a lifestyle they can't afford. Private schools for the kids, expensive cars, that kitchen renovation last year all financed. So their concern about my finances was really concern about their own. They need your inheritance, Margaret. Desperately. Without it, both families face bankruptcy. James pulled out another folder. But that's not the worst part. My stomach clenched tighter. There's worse. 3 months ago, David took out a life insurance policy on you. A big one. The room seemed to tilt. He went $2 million with him as the beneficiary. He listed himself as having an insurable interest due to being your caregiver and financially responsible for your welfare. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Margaret, are you all right? A life insurance policy, I whispered. On me. It gets worse. The policy has a clause that pays double for accidental death. The voice message suddenly made terrible sense. Not just wishing I would die, but potentially having reasons to help that along. James, are you telling me that my son might actually... I'm telling you that Robert anticipated this possibility and put protections in place. He pulled out one more document. This is a letter Robert wrote to be opened only if evidence of fraud or potential harm emerged. With shaking hands, I took the envelope marked, "For Margaret if the worst happens." Inside was a single sheet of paper in Robert's careful handwriting. My dearest Maggie, if you're reading this, it means our children have shown their true colors. I'm sorry I was right to be suspicious, and I'm sorrier that you had to discover their betrayal. But I want you to know that you're not helpless. The investigator I hired continues to monitor the situation. If either David or Sarah has attempted to harm you financially or physically, evidence will be provided to the authorities. You are stronger than you know, smarter than they realize, and richer than they suspect. The account information at the bottom of this page will show you exactly how rich. Take control, my love. Show them that you're nobody's victim. Love always, Robert P.S. Check account number 4437291 at First National. The password is rosegarden224. I looked up at James with tears in my eyes. Robert knew all along. He knew enough to protect you. The question is, what do you want to do with this information? I thought about David's tearful confession in my kitchen, his promises to do better. I thought about Sarah's casserole and her newfound encouragement for me to spend my money. All of it. Every conversation, every visit, every concerned phone call had been contaminated by their desperation and greed. I want to see the account Robert mentioned. James turned his computer screen toward me and logged into the bank's website. When the account balance appeared, I gasped. $3.2 million, 3 times what my children thought I was worth. Robert moved money throughout your marriage, James explained. Small amounts carefully invested, completely legally. He created a safety net that you could access if you ever needed to disappear or start over. Disappear. Margaret, your son has a $4 million reason to see you dead. Your daughter knows about the policy. The investigator confirmed she was present when David applied for it. The room was spinning again. They're both in on it. It appears so. I sat back in my chair, my mind racing. James, I need you to do something for me. Anything. I need you to arrange a family meeting, all of us here in your office tomorrow if possible. Are you sure that's wise? I smiled, feeling something cold and hard crystallizing in my chest. Oh, I'm very sure. It's time my children learned that their mother is full of surprises. The family meeting was set for 2 p.m. the following day. I spent the morning preparing not just mentally, but practically. I called my neighbor Helen and asked her to keep an eye on my house. I transferred money from my secret account to my checking account. I made arrangements that my children knew nothing about. Most importantly, I called the private investigator James had mentioned. Mrs. Thompson, this is Daniel Rivers. I worked for your late husband, Mr. Rivers. I understand you've been monitoring my children's activities, among other things. Yes, ma'am. Your husband was very thorough in his instructions. I need to know everything, not just the financial information, but everything they've done over the past 6 months. What he told me over the next hour made my blood run cold. David hadn't just taken out a life insurance policy. He'd been researching my health conditions, my medications, and had even called my doctor's office pretending to be concerned about my mental competency. Sarah had been subtly poisoning family friends against me, suggesting I was becoming confused and paranoid, setting the stage for questions about my decision-making capacity. Together, they'd consulted with a lawyer about having me declared incompetent. Mrs. Thompson. Daniel said carefully, "I need to ask you something. Are you planning to confront them directly?" "Yes, I strongly advise against that. If they're desperate enough to consider," he paused, "if they're desperate enough to take extreme measures, confronting them might accelerate their timeline. Mr. Rivers, my children may be greedy and manipulative, but they're not murderers. Ma'am, with respect, people with $2 million in life insurance policies and six-figure debt loads have killed for less." His words hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. "Are you suggesting I should just hide and hope they don't succeed in having me declared incompetent or worse? I'm suggesting you let the professionals handle this. We have enough evidence to bring criminal charges for the insurance fraud alone." I thought about that, about my son potentially going to jail for insurance fraud, about my daughter being charged as an accessory. At 2 p.m. sharp, I walked into James Morrison's conference room, where David, Claire, Sarah, and Tom were already seated around the mahogany table. They looked uncomfortable, probably wondering why they'd been summoned to a lawyer's office. I took my seat at the head of the table, James beside me, with 3 thick files in front of him. "Thank you all for coming. I thought it was time we had an honest family discussion." Mom, Sarah began. "What's this about?" "It's about truth, Sarah. Something we haven't had much of in our family lately." David shifted nervously. "If this is about the will again, oh, it's about much more than the will." I nodded to James, who opened the first file. "David, would you like to explain to everyone why you took out a $2 million life insurance policy on me?" The silence was deafening. Claire's face went white. Sarah's mouth fell open. I don't know what you're talking about." James slid the insurance documents across the table. "Policy number 77493882, dated 3 months ago. Beneficiary, David Michael Thompson." David stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. "Mom, I can explain." "Please do. Explain why my son needs $2 million if I die accidentally." "It's not like that. It's just we were worried about funeral expenses. Estate taxes." "Estate taxes on what estate, David? According to you, I'm spending all my money on frivolous travel." Sarah found her voice. "David, please tell me you didn't actually do this." "Sarah, you know about the policy. Mr. Rivers has photos of you at the insurance office with David when he applied." Sarah's face crumpled. "Mom, it wasn't supposed to be like this." "What was it supposed to be like?" "We were desperate. We owe so much money, and we thought if something happened to you naturally." "Naturally," I repeated. "But the policy pays double for accidents." The room was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop. "You want to know what's really interesting? The policy requires beneficiaries to be responsible for the insured person's care, which explains why you've been so eager to have me declared incompetent." Tom, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. "Margaret, surely you don't think we would actually hurt you?" I looked around the table at these people I'd raised, loved, supported, and trusted. Tom, a week ago I would have said no. Today I honestly don't know. Claire started crying. "This is insane. We're family. Are we? Because family doesn't plot each other's deaths for insurance money." David's shoulders sagged in defeat. "Mom, we would never hurt you." "Never. The policy was just insurance in case something happened naturally." "Insurance? For whom, David, you or me?" I let them sit with that question for a moment before continuing. "But here's what you really need to know. Everything you think you understand about this situation is wrong." James opened the second file. "Your mother isn't the vulnerable widow you thought she was." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked. "I mean your father left your mother significantly wealthier than any of you realized. The inheritance you've been fighting over, it's a fraction of what she actually has." I watched their faces as James explained the hidden accounts, the careful investments, the safety net Robert had created. $3.2 million, James said finally. "In addition to the house, the investments you know about, and various other assets." David's face went through several color changes. You've had over $3 million this whole time. Your father made sure I'd never be dependent on anyone, including my children. But why hide it? Sarah asked. Why let us think you were living on a fixed income? Because I said standing up and walking to the window, your father suspected this might happen. He wanted to see how you'd behave if you thought I needed your help, versus how you'd behave if you thought I had money you couldn't access. Claire's voice was small, and we failed the test spectacularly. David put his head in his hands. So the will that cuts us out only covers the assets we knew about. The money that could have been yours if you'd shown me love instead of greed. Tom leaned forward. What about the hidden money? What happens to it? I turned back to face them. What about it? What happens to it? And there it was. Even now, even knowing everything that had been revealed, Tom was still thinking about the money. It goes wherever I decide it goes. And right now, I'm thinking it goes to people who see me as more than a dollar sign. Sarah started crying harder. Mom, please, we can fix this. We can be better. Can you? Because right now, even after learning that your brother took out a life insurance policy on me, your husband's first question was about money. The silence stretched uncomfortable and long. Finally, David looked up. Mom, what do you want from us? I want you to leave. Leave. Leave this office. Leave my life. Leave me alone. All of you forever, Sarah whispered. I considered the question. These people had plotted to have me declared incompetent, taken out insurance policies, betting on my death, and manipulated every interaction we'd had for months. But they were still my children. Ask me in 5 years, I said finally. If you can go 5 years without contacting me about money inheritance or anything related to my assets, maybe we can try again. David stood up slowly. And if we can't, then you'll have your answer about whether you ever really loved me at all. Claire was still crying. Margaret, please don't do this. I'm not doing anything, Claire. You all did this. I'm just responding to what you've shown me about your priorities. As they gathered their things and prepared to leave, Sarah turned back one more time. Mom, for what it's worth, I do love you. I know you don't believe that now, but I do. Sarah, if you love me, then prove it. Prove it by not contacting me about money, not asking about my will, not checking on my finances. Prove it by leaving me alone, to live my life without having to wonder if my own children are plotting against me. After they left, James and I sat in the empty conference room. How do you feel? He asked. Lighter, I said, surprising myself. For the first time in months, I feel completely free. And the insurance policy? Cancel it. I'm removing their insurable interest by removing them from my life. James made notes in his file. What about the criminal charges Daniel Rivers mentioned? I thought about that, about my son potentially going to jail for insurance fraud. About my daughter being charged as an accessory. No charges, I said finally. They're not in my life anymore. That's punishment enough, but I was wrong about that because the real revelation was still coming. 3 months later, I was living my best life. I'd booked the Ireland trip I'd always wanted, enrolled in Italian cooking classes, and started volunteering at the local animal shelter. My phone wasn't ringing with manipulative check-ins. No one was dropping by to assess my competency, and I was sleeping better than I had in years. That's when Daniel Rivers called with information that changed everything. Mrs. Thompson, I need to see you immediately. There's been a development. He arrived at my house within an hour, carrying a laptop and looking grim. What is it, Daniel? Remember how I told you I was monitoring your children's activities? Yes. Well, I've been monitoring more than just their finances. He opened his laptop and showed me a series of screenshots. These are from David and Claire's text messages over the past week. I read the first message from Claire to David. She's been gone 3 months. Maybe it's time to try a different approach. David's response. I don't think she's coming back from this. Claire, what if we were wrong about the insurance thing? What if there was another way? My blood ran cold. Another way to what? Keep reading, Daniel said quietly. David, Tom thinks we should wait longer, but I'm not sure we can afford to. Claire, the private investigator she hired might be expensive. Maybe if we make her think someone's threatening her, she'll come back to us for protection. I looked up at Daniel. They know about you. It appears so, but keep reading. The messages got worse. They'd discovered my Italian cooking classes and were planning to accidentally run into me there. They'd found out about my Ireland trip and discussed showing up at the airport to stage a tearful reunion. But the final message made my hands shake. David, if emotional manipulation doesn't work, we might have to get creative. Tom found out about Mom's real net worth. We're talking about enough money to solve everyone's problems permanently. Claire, what kind of creative David? The kind where accidents happen to people who travel alone. I set the laptop down with trembling hands. Are they actually planning to hurt me, Mrs. Thompson? I think it's time to involve the police. But before I could answer, my doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see Sarah and Tom on my porch. They're here, I whispered. Daniel immediately called someone on his phone. This is Rivers. We need that backup now. Sarah was smiling when I opened the door, but it was a different kind of smile than I'd seen before. Calculating. Cold. Hi, Mom. We were in the neighborhood and thought we'd stop by. Sarah, I asked you not to contact me. We're not contacting you about money, Tom said smoothly. We just missed you. They pushed past me into my living room where Daniel was quickly packing up his laptop. Who's this? Sarah asked, her voice sharp. A friend, I said carefully. Tom studied Daniel with interest. You look familiar. Have we met? I don't think so, Daniel replied, but I could see tension in his shoulders. Sarah walked to my mantelpiece where I'd placed photos from my cooking classes. You look happy, Mom. Italy was good for you. I haven't been to Italy yet. Oh, I meant the cooking classes, though. I heard you're planning quite the European adventure. The way she said it made my skin crawl. How did you hear that Tom answered before Sarah could? People talk Margaret, especially when their neighbors start traveling alone to foreign countries. There was something threatening in his tone that I'd never heard before. Daniel stood up. Mrs. Thompson, we should go. Go where Sarah asked, her eyes narrowing. Away from here, Daniel said bluntly. That's when Tom smiled, and I realized with crystal clarity that my daughter's husband was dangerous in a way I'd never understood. Actually, Tom said I think Margaret should stay. We have family business to discuss. Mom, Sarah said, her voice taking on a pleading quality that now sounded completely fake. We know you're angry, but cutting us out completely isn't fair. We're your children. And we deserve something, Tom added. After all these years, after everything we've done for you, we deserve security. The mask was completely off now. Security, I repeated. You mean my death? Sarah's fake smile faltered. Mom, don't be dramatic. Am I being dramatic, or am I being realistic about children who take out life insurance policies on their mothers and then plan accidents for women who travel alone? The silence that followed was electric with danger. Then Tom laughed. Well, this is interesting. You know about the insurance. I know about everything. Do you? Sarah stepped closer to me. Because what you don't seem to understand, Mom, is that we're not asking anymore. We're telling. That's when I heard the sirens in the distance. Daniel smiled. Actually, Mrs. Thompson isn't telling you anything, but she is pressing charges. As the police cars pulled into my driveway, Tom's expression shifted from confident to furious. You called the cops? I called them 3 months ago, I said, calmly. When I discovered the insurance fraud, the conspiracy to have me declared incompetent, and the plans to engineer my accidental death. Sarah grabbed my arm. Mom, you can't do this to us. We're family. I looked into my daughter's eyes and saw a stranger. No, Sarah. Family doesn't plot murder for money. As the police officers entered my house, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete and total freedom from the people who'd been slowly poisoning my life with their greed. Daniel handed the officers a thick file of evidence, while I watched my children and their spouses being read their rights. Mrs. Thompson, the lead detective, said, You're very lucky your husband was smart enough to protect you. Yes, I agreed, looking around my house that finally felt safe again. Robert always was 3 steps ahead of everyone else. Silence surrounded me in the hours after the police left. I'd given my statement, signed the necessary papers, and watched as my children were led away in handcuffs. The detective had been kind but direct based on the evidence Daniel had gathered. They would likely face charges ranging from conspiracy to fraud to attempted murder. I wandered through my house, touching objects that held memories: Robert's collection of dental journals that I'd kept on the bookshelf, the quilt my mother had made for our wedding, the clock that had chimed through 40 years of family dinners. Everything looked different now, as if the betrayal had altered the very fabric of my home. I picked up a family photo from the mantel, David's high school graduation, all of us smiling, Robert's arm around my shoulder, Sarah beaming with pride at her big brother. Had it all been a lie? Or had something fundamental changed when Robert died? As if his death had given permission for the darkness that had always lurked beneath the surface to finally emerge. I found myself in front of the liquor cabinet, staring at Robert's collection of single malts that I'd never touched. With deliberate movements, I poured a finger of whiskey into a crystal tumbler, Robert's favorite for special occasions. The amber liquid caught the evening light as I raised it in a silent toast. To you, Robert. You were right about everything. The whiskey burned, going down, warming me from the inside in a way nothing had since this nightmare began. I poured another and carried it to the back porch, where Robert's roses were blooming against all odds despite months of neglect. Dignity can't be taken. It can only be surrendered. Robert had said that once during a particularly difficult period with David's teenage rebellion. At the time, I thought he was being unnecessarily stern. Now I understood what he meant. I had nearly surrendered my dignity by allowing my children to define my worth based on what they could extract from me. Never again. The phone rang, startling me out of my reverie. It was James. Margaret, I just heard from the police. They're charging all 4 of them. The evidence is overwhelming. I expected to feel satisfaction or even vindication. Instead, a profound weariness settled over me. Is this what Robert would have wanted? For his children to go to prison? I think Robert wanted you to be safe above all else. But that's not why I'm calling. The police found something else while searching David's home office. A draft of a petition to have you declared mentally incompetent. It was dated 2 weeks ago with signatures from both David and Sarah. They were planning to file it next month. The whiskey glass nearly slipped from my fingers. My own children had been prepared to strip me of my autonomy, to take away my very personhood for money. What happens now, James? Now you live your life, Margaret. You travel to Ireland, you take those cooking classes, you read books without guilt. You do all the things they tried to prevent because they saw your joy as a threat to their inheritance. And my grandchildren, the innocent casualties of their parents' greed. James sighed. That's complicated, but there are ways to establish trust for their education that their parents can't touch. We can discuss options when you're ready. After hanging up, I carried my whiskey out to the garden and sat on the bench Robert had built years ago. The evening air was soft with early summer carrying the scent of his roses. For the first time since finding that voice message, I allowed myself to cry, not delicate tears, but gut-wrenching sobs that tore through my body like a storm. I cried for the family I thought I had. I cried for Robert, who had seen this coming but couldn't protect me from the pain of discovery. I cried for the loss of the comfort of illusions, the false belief that blood guarantees love, that raising children ensures their loyalty, that family is the one safe harbor in a storm. When the tears finally subsided, I felt oddly cleansed. The future stretched before me, uncertain but entirely mine. No more pretending, no more second-guessing. No more trying to buy love with money or attention or forgiveness. The truth had set me free, even if freedom came with a cost I never expected to pay. 2 weeks later, I sat in the small office of Dr. Eleanor Winters, a therapist James had recommended. Unlike my children's manipulative concern, Dr. Winters' calm attention felt genuine. Her questions aimed at understanding rather than exploiting. How are you sleeping since the arrests? Better than you might expect. There's something peaceful about knowing exactly where you stand with people, even when that place is nowhere. She nodded, making a brief note. And how are you feeling about your upcoming trip? The Ireland trip was just a week away, my first true adventure in decades. Despite everything, I found myself looking forward to it with an anticipation that surprised me. I'm excited. Nervous, too. Robert and I always talked about seeing the Irish countryside, staying in those charming bed and breakfasts, visiting the Book of Kells. Now I'm doing it alone, which feels both sad and strangely empowering. Dr. Winters leaned forward slightly. Margaret, many people in your situation would be canceling their plans, retreating into safety after such a traumatic betrayal. What makes you different? The question caught me off guard. I hadn't considered myself different or special, just a woman adjusting to new and terrible realities. Maybe because I'm tired of letting fear dictate my choices. For months, my children used fear to manipulate me. Fear of being alone, fear of running out of money, fear of losing my independence. If I cancel my trip, they win. Their betrayal would still be controlling my life, even from jail cells. That's remarkable insight. What else have you learned from this experience? I looked out the window at the maple trees swaying in the summer breeze, considering her question. I've learned that silence isn't weakness. For months, I watched and listened while my children revealed who they truly were. My silence wasn't absence, it was assessment. I've also learned that money doesn't just reveal character, it creates it. Or maybe it distorts it. The possibility of inheritance transformed my children into people I didn't recognize. Would they have been different if Robert and I had been poor? Dr. Winters smiled gently. An interesting philosophical question, but perhaps not the most useful one for healing. The situation you faced existed because of the specific circumstances of your life. Different circumstances might have created different challenges, but rarely no challenges at all. After our session, I walked through the park near her office, watching children play, while their parents sat on benches scrolling through phones or chatting with each other. How many of those parents were creating college funds, saving for their children's futures, sacrificing their own comforts to provide better lives for the next generation? How many of those children would grow up to see those sacrifices as their due, those provisions as their entitlement? I stopped at a small cafe and ordered lunch, something I rarely did alone before. The young waitress smiled as she set down my sandwich. Anything else I can get you? No, this is perfect. Thank you. She hesitated, then said, I hope this isn't weird, but you remind me of my grandmother. She always has lunch alone on Thursdays too. Says it's her me time after her husband passed. I smiled, touched by this small human connection. Well, your grandmother sounds like a wise woman. She is. Always tells me, Jesse, remember that your life belongs to you first. Everyone else is just visiting. As the waitress moved to another table, I considered her grandmother's words. Your life belongs to you first. How different would my relationship with my children have been if I'd embraced that philosophy years ago? Back home, I continued preparations for my trip. I'd booked a small guided tour, 8 travelers, mainly seniors like myself, with a local guide to show us the hidden gems of Ireland. The itinerary included everything Robert and I had dreamed of seeing: the cliffs of Moher Trinity College Library, the Ring of Kerry, small villages where traditional music still filled local pubs each evening. As I packed, I came across the scarf Robert had bought me for our last anniversary, emerald green silk, that he said would match the Irish hills. I held it to my face, inhaling deeply, hoping to catch some fading trace of him. There was nothing but the faint scent of the cedar chest where I'd stored it. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my memories. Through the peephole, I saw Helen from next door holding what looked like a casserole dish. Since the arrest, Helen had been checking on me daily, bringing food, offering companionship, carefully avoiding mention of what she called the unpleasantness, unless I brought it up first. I brought lasagna, she announced as I opened the door. Enough for dinner tonight and leftovers for tomorrow. Helen, you're too kind. You don't need to keep feeding me. She waved away my protest. I know I don't need to. I want to. Besides, Frank made too much as usual. As we settled in the kitchen with cups of tea, Helen studied me with the directness of a friendship that spanned 20 years. You look different, Margaret. More like yourself somehow. I feel different, lighter despite everything. She nodded, understanding, without explanation. You know, when Frank had his heart attack last year, the doctor told us something interesting. He said sometimes the body can adapt to pain or dysfunction so gradually that you don't realize how bad things have gotten until the problem is fixed. Then suddenly you can breathe again, and you realize you'd forgotten what breathing freely felt like. It was the perfect analogy. For years, I'd been adapting to subtle manipulations, small disrespects, tiny erosions of my autonomy so gradually that I hadn't recognized how suffocated I'd become until those pressures were suddenly removed. That's exactly it, Helen. I'd forgotten what it felt like to make decisions without calculating their impact on David and Sarah's approval, to spend money without justifying it, to plan a future based on my desires rather than their expectations. Helen reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Well, good riddance to bad rubbish, as my mother used to say. Now tell me about this trip of yours. I want to hear every detail so I can be properly jealous. As I described the itinerary, Helen's genuine interest highlighted another truth. Real love celebrates your joy rather than resenting it. Real love wants your happiness, even when it doesn't directly benefit from it. Real love sees you as a person, not a resource. After Helen left, I returned to packing, adding Robert's scarf to my suitcase. The phone rang an unfamiliar number with the local area code. I hesitated before answering, wary of reporters, who had been calling since the arrests made local headlines. Mrs. Thompson. This is Eliza Daniels. I'm David's neighbor. We've met at his Christmas party last year. I remembered her vaguely, a petite woman with prematurely gray hair who'd complimented my cranberry sauce. Yes, of course. What can I do for you, Mrs. Daniels? I'm calling about Max and Lily. Your grandchildren. My heart stuttered. In the chaos of arrests and betrayals, I'd had little time to consider what was happening to David's children, 10-year-old Max and 8-year-old Lily. Are they all right? They're staying with Claire's sister, but it's not ideal. She works full-time and the kids are struggling. They don't understand where their parents are, why they can't go home. I thought, well, I wondered if you might want to see them. They keep asking about you. The question pierced me like a physical pain. My grandchildren were collateral damage in this war I never wanted to fight. Innocent casualties who must be bewildered by the sudden upheaval of their lives. I appreciate your call, Mrs. Daniels, but it's complicated. My relationship with David and Claire. I know, she interrupted. Everyone knows. It's been in all the papers. But the children don't understand adult betrayals or family finances. They just know their grandmother disappeared from their lives at the same time their parents did. I closed my eyes, picturing Max's serious little face, so like Robert's in Lily's infectious laugh. They were not responsible for their parents' crimes. They were not tainted by David and Claire's greed. Where are they now at Claire's sister's house on Oakwood Drive? I'm taking them to the park tomorrow afternoon around 3 if you wanted to accidentally run into us. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. A small beginning to navigate this new terrain where I could be in my grandchildren's lives without being manipulated by their parents. I'll think about it, Mrs. Daniels. Thank you for calling. After hanging up, I sat motionless, overwhelmed by this new complication. How could I protect myself while not abandoning two children who needed stability more than ever? How could I be present for them without being drawn back into the toxic dynamic their parents had created? These questions still swirled in my mind the next morning when the newspaper arrived with the headline, "Thompson Family Fraud Case Expands New Evidence of Elder Abuse Conspiracy." The article detailed how investigators had uncovered a wider plot involving not just David and Sarah, but 5 other families in similar situations. Older widows and widowers, whose adult children had conspired to gain control of their assets through fraudulent means. I was part of a pattern, not an anomaly. The realization was both disturbing and oddly comforting. I wasn't alone in this betrayal. I wasn't uniquely unlucky in my children, or uniquely blind to their true natures. This was happening across our community, a silent epidemic of greed disguised as concern. The article quoted a detective. What makes the Thompson case stand out is the deceased husband's foresight. Robert Thompson's protective measures likely saved his wife's life and sparked an investigation that may help many other vulnerable seniors. Robert again 3 steps ahead of everyone, his protection extending beyond me to others he'd never even met. The thought brought fresh tears, not of sorrow this time, but gratitude for the man who'd loved me enough to ensure my safety even after he was gone. Later that day, I found myself driving to Oakwood Drive, circling the block 3 times before gathering the courage to park near the small neighborhood park. From my car, I could see Mrs. Daniels on a bench, watching Max kick a soccer ball, while Lily pumped her legs on a swing set. They looked smaller than I remembered, more vulnerable. Max's shoulders hunched forward in the defensive posture of a child trying to make himself invisible. Lily's swinging seemed mechanical, lacking the joyful abandon I associated with her. I stepped out of the car before I could change my mind, walking slowly toward the playground. Mrs. Daniels spotted me first, offering a small nod of encouragement. Then Lily looked up, her swing slowing as her eyes widened in recognition. Grandma. Grandma. She leaped from the swing midair, racing toward me with arms outstretched. I knelt to catch her, unprepared for the force of her small body crashing into mine, or the way her arms locked around my neck as if she'd never let go. You came back. I told Max you would, but he said you were gone forever, like Grandpa Max approached more cautiously, his face a battlefield of conflicting emotions, hope warring with hurt, joy with suspicion. Why didn't you come see us? Where have you been? The simple questions had no simple answers. How do you explain to children that their parents tried to harm their grandmother, that the adults they trust most in the world are capable of terrible things? I've been dealing with some adult problems, Max, but I've missed you both very much. Dad said you were sick and confused. Lily volunteered her innocence like a knife to my heart. But you don't look sick. I'm not sick, sweetheart. I'm perfectly fine. Then why did the police take Mom and Dad away? Max demanded, his voice cracking. When are they coming home? Mrs. Daniels stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Max's shoulder. Remember what we talked about, Max. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes and have to face consequences. Like when you took that candy bar from the store and had to go apologize to the manager. It was an oversimplification bordering on falsehood. But what was the alternative? To tell these children that their parents had plotted my death for money, that the mother who tucked them in at night and the father who taught them to ride bikes had revealed themselves to be people capable of unspeakable betrayal. Your parents made some serious mistakes, I said carefully. They're going to be away for a while, sorting things out with the police and the courts. But they're coming back, right? Lily's eyes filled with tears. They have to come back. I held her close, feeling her small heart race against mine. Yes, sweetheart, they'll come back eventually. But it might be a long time. Max kicked at the wood chips covering the playground. Is that why we're staying with Aunt Jennifer? Because of the mistakes? Yes, that's why. Can't we stay with you instead? Lily pulled back to look at me, hope lighting her tear-stained face. Aunt Jennifer is nice, but she doesn't make pancakes on Saturdays like you do. And her house smells funny. The question caught me off guard. Stay with me. Take custody of my grandchildren, while their parents faced criminal charges. It hadn't occurred to me as a possibility, though. Perhaps it should have. Mrs. Daniels caught my eye over Lily's head, giving a small shrug that seemed to say, "It's not the craziest idea." That's a big question, Lily. I need to talk to a lot of people before we could consider that, lawyers and judges and social workers. But you'd want us... Max's voice was small, vulnerable in a way that broke my heart anew. Even though you're mad at Dad, in that moment, looking at Robert's eyes and Max's face, feeling Lily's desperate grip on my neck, I understood something fundamental about love that had eluded me in the chaos of betrayal. Love isn't a transaction. It isn't earned or lost based on merit. Love simply is, especially for these children, who had done nothing wrong except be born to parents who lost their way. I would always want you, Max. Always. No matter what your parents did or didn't do. My love for you has nothing to do with being mad at your dad. Mrs. Daniels discreetly wiped away a tear. Well, why don't you three spend some time together here at the park? While I run a quick errand, I'll be back in about an hour. As she walked away, I sat on a nearby bench, watching as Lily tugged me toward the swings. Push me, Grandma, like you used to. For the next hour, I pushed swings, examined interesting rocks, admired cartwheels, and answered questions as honestly as I could without destroying their love for their parents. It was a delicate balance, acknowledging the reality of the situation, without burdening children with adult complexities they couldn't possibly process. When Mrs. Daniels returned, the children seemed lighter, as if a weight had been temporarily lifted. I promised to visit again soon and to call every day until we figured out a more permanent arrangement. As I drove home, my mind raced with new possibilities and complications. Could I really take custody of my grandchildren? Should I? Was it fair to postpone my own plans, the trips, the classes, the independent life I'd been planning to raise another generation? Was it fair to the children to be raised by a grandmother who their parents had tried to eliminate? There were no easy answers, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something beyond anger and betrayal. I felt purpose. Whatever happened with David and Sarah, whatever legal consequences they faced, Max and Lily deserved stability, love, and protection from the harsh realities their parents had created. I called James as soon as I got home, explaining the situation and my conflicted feelings. "It's complicated legally," he admitted, "but not impossible. You're their closest relative who isn't incarcerated or implicated in the crimes. The courts generally prefer to keep children with family when possible." "But is it right, James? Is it fair to them?" To me, his voice softened. "Margaret Fairness left the building the moment your children decided to conspire against you. Now we're just dealing with what remains. Those children need someone, and right now that someone might be you. What about my trip? It's next week. Go on your trip. It's only 10 days. The legal wheels move slowly enough that nothing will be decided before you return. Consider it a last hurrah before making any permanent decisions." After hanging up, I wandered through my house with new eyes, seeing potential changes everywhere. The guest room could become Max's room. The office could be converted for Lily. The backyard, neglected since Robert's death, could have a swing set again, a garden where the children could grow vegetables and flowers. But was I ready to be a parent again at 64? To attend school functions and help with homework, and navigate the turbulent waters of adolescence that loomed just ahead for Max? To put my own rediscovered independence on hold indefinitely? And what about the children's relationship with their parents? Would David and Claire fight me for custody once they were released? Would they poison the children against me from prison? Would visitations become battlegrounds for the ongoing war they had started? These questions still churned in my mind that evening as I continued packing for Ireland. The emerald scarf lay on my bed beside the new walking shoes I'd purchased, the travel guidebooks I'd studied, the camera I'd bought specifically for this trip. Symbols of the future I'd planned for myself. A future now complicated by unexpected responsibilities and emotional entanglements I hadn't anticipated. My phone rang again. This time it was Daniel Rivers, Mrs. Thompson. "I've been trying to reach you all day. There's been an important development in the case." "What kind of development?" "Your daughter Sarah has offered to testify against the others in exchange for a reduced sentence. She claims Tom was the mastermind, that he pressured her to participate, that she never intended for any harm to come to you." I sank onto the edge of my bed. The wind knocked from my lungs. Sarah was turning on her husband, her brother, her sister-in-law, trying to save herself by throwing the others under the proverbial bus. "Do you believe her?" Daniel's hesitation spoke volumes. "I believe she's telling partial truths mixed with self-serving lies. The evidence suggests she was a willing participant, though perhaps not the architect of the entire scheme. But people facing prison time often discover convenient truths that paint themselves in a better light. The information settled over me like a shroud. Even now, even after everything, my children were incapable of honesty or accountability. They were still playing angles, still looking for advantages, still trying to manipulate outcomes to their benefit, without regard for truth or justice. Is there anything I need to do? Not at this point. The prosecutor wanted you to be aware, since Sarah's attorney has requested a meeting with you. They're hoping you might support her plea deal, maybe even speak on her behalf at sentencing. The audacity was breathtaking. After plotting to defraud me, after knowing about a life insurance policy that would benefit from my death, after attempting to have me declared incompetent, Sarah still believed she could manipulate me into helping her avoid the consequences of her actions. "I'll consider it," I said, though I had no intention of doing so. Thank you for letting me know. After hanging up, I stared at the ceiling, wondering if there was any bottom to this pit of betrayal. Would I ever stop discovering new depths to my children's capacity for self-interest and moral compromise? The phone rang again, exhausted by the day's emotional roller coaster. I almost didn't answer, but it could be about the grandchildren, so I forced myself to pick up. Margaret Thompson speaking. Mrs. Thompson, this is Jennifer Walsh, Claire's sister. I'm calling about Max and Lily. Yes, Mrs. Walsh, I saw them at the park today. I know, that's why I'm calling. Her voice held none of the hostility I might have expected from my daughter-in-law's sister. They haven't stopped talking about you since they got home. Max even smiled for the first time in weeks. I'm glad to hear that. She took a deep breath as if gathering courage. Look, I'll be blunt. I love those kids, but I'm not equipped to raise them long term. I work 60 hours a week. I'm single. My apartment has one bedroom. They're sleeping on an air mattress in my living room. I understand. It's a difficult situation for everyone. Eliza mentioned you might be willing to take them, at least temporarily. I'm considering it. There are legal issues to navigate, and I have a trip planned that I leave for next week. Jennifer's relief was audible. The trip is no problem. I can keep them until you get back, and I'll help with the legal stuff however I can. Claire. Her voice faltered slightly. Claire did some terrible things, but these kids are innocent. They deserve better than air mattresses and a guardian who's never home. As we discussed logistics, I felt an odd kinship with this woman who had been thrust into caregiving by circumstances beyond her control. Like me, she was collateral damage in a war she never wanted to fight, trying to protect the truly innocent from the fallout of others' choices. By the time we hung up, we had a tentative plan. Jennifer would keep the children until I returned from Ireland. I would talk to a family law attorney about temporary guardianship. We would coordinate to make the transition as smooth as possible for Max and Lily. I finished packing in a daze, my emotions too complex to untangle. Joy at reconnecting with my grandchildren, sorrow for their pain and confusion, anxiety about the responsibilities looming ahead, anger at my children for creating this situation, relief that I had the resources to provide stability for Max and Lily when they needed it most. And somewhere beneath it all, a quiet certainty that Robert would approve of this path, that caring for our grandchildren, giving them the security and love their parents had sacrificed for greed, was exactly what he would have wanted me to do. The next morning, I woke to sunshine streaming through my bedroom window, and the unexpected sound of birdsong. A cardinal perched on the branch outside my window, its brilliant red plumage like a splash of paint against the green leaves. I watched it for several minutes, mesmerized by its ordinary beauty that somehow felt extraordinary in this moment. Life continues, I thought. Despite betrayal, despite grief, despite upheaval, the birds still sing, the sun still rises, and we still have choices about how to move forward. I rose and dressed with a new sense of purpose. Before Ireland, before guardianship decisions, before the next chapter could begin, I needed closure on this one. I needed to see my children one last time, not with anger or accusations, but with the clarity that comes from acceptance of what is rather than what should have been. I called James and asked him to arrange visitations at the county jail, where David, Claire, Sarah, and Tom were being held awaiting trial. He protested, concerned about my emotional well-being, but eventually agreed to make the arrangements. Sometimes the only way forward is through the heart of the storm. Sometimes healing requires facing the wound, directly acknowledging its existence without letting it define you. Sometimes goodbye needs to be spoken face to face to be truly heard. Tomorrow I would see my children for what might be the last time. Not as the vulnerable widow they had underestimated, not as the inheritance they had coveted, but as a woman who had found her strength in the very crucible they had created to destroy her. Tomorrow, I would look into the eyes of the people who had plotted my demise and show them that they had failed in the most fundamental way possible. They had not broken me. They had not diminished me. They had accidentally set me free. Tomorrow would bring confrontation and closure, but tonight, I had packing to finish, grandchildren to call, and a future to plan that looked nothing like I had imagined, and yet held possibilities for joy I hadn't dared to consider. The cardinal took flight from my window, a flash of red against the endless blue sky. Free, unencumbered, moving forward without looking back. Tomorrow I would do the same. The county jail's visitor area smelled of industrial disinfectant and desperation. I sat in one of 4 identical booths, each separated by plexiglass dividers, offering the illusion of privacy. A clock on the wall ticked loudly, marking time, in a place where time seemed both accelerated and suspended. 15 minutes per inmate. That's what the stone-faced guard had told me. 15 minutes to face each person who had conspired against me. 15 minutes for what might be final goodbyes. David entered first, shuffling an orange jumpsuit and slip-on shoes, wrists cuffed in front of him. The past month had transformed him. His normally meticulous appearance had deteriorated. Stubble darkened his jaw. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his shoulders curled forward as if trying to make himself smaller in this harsh environment. He slid into the seat across from me, separated by thick glass. For a long moment, we simply stared at each other, the telephone handsets resting in their cradles like loaded weapons neither of us wanted to be the first to pick up. Finally, I lifted mine. David mirrored the action, his handcuffs clinking against the metal shelf. "I wasn't sure you'd come." His voice sounded different through the electronic filter, tinnier, more vulnerable. "I wasn't sure I would either. But we need to talk about Max and Lily." Something flickered in David's eyes. Pain relief, gratitude, I couldn't tell which. "Are they okay?" "Aunt Jennifer won't tell us much. They're adjusting. I've seen them several times now. I'm talking to a lawyer about temporary guardianship while you and Claire are here." David's composure cracked. His free hand covered his face for a moment, shoulders shaking slightly. "Thank you. I know you have every reason to hate us, to want nothing to do with our children. I don't hate you, David. That's what I came to tell you. I don't hate any of you. I'm disappointed, heartbroken, and deeply angry. But hate requires energy I'm no longer willing to spend on this situation." He looked up, surprise evident on his face. "After everything we did, because of everything you did, hate would keep me tethered to this betrayal forever. I'm choosing to move forward instead." David leaned closer to the glass. "Mom, I need you to know something. I never would have actually hurt you." The insurance policy was Tom's idea. He said it was standard estate planning. I was stupid and desperate enough to believe him. The denial rang hollow after everything I'd learned. Whether he would have physically harmed me or merely continued the psychological and financial abuse remained academic. The intent to exploit had been undeniable. "It doesn't matter anymore, David. What matters now is what happens to your children." The conversation shifted to practical matters, my plans for temporary guardianship, the children's adjustment school arrangements. David listened intently, occasionally, wiping his eyes when I mentioned small details about the children's lives that he was missing. Max scoring a goal in soccer, Lily learning to braid her own hair. As our 15 minutes drew to a close, David pressed his palm against the glass. "I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but please tell them I love them. Tell them I think about them every day. I'll tell them. They need to know they're loved even by parents who made terrible mistakes." The guard appeared to escort David away. As he stood to leave, I spoke the words I'd come to say. "Goodbye, David. I forgive you not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace." His step faltered, but the guard urged him forward, and he disappeared through the metal door without looking back. Claire came next, entering the visitors area, with her head high despite the circumstances. Unlike David, she seemed almost defiant. Her makeup carefully applied despite jail restrictions, her orange jumpsuit somehow looking more like a fashion choice than a prison requirement. She sat across from me, lifting the phone with perfectly manicured nails that somehow hadn't broken during her incarceration. "Margaret," she began before I could speak, "I want to apologize." The words sounded rehearsed, as if she'd practiced them in front of a mirror. "Claire, I'm not here for apologies. I'm here about Max and Lily." Her expression shifted, maternal concern replacing the careful contrition. "Are they eating properly? Lily's allergic to strawberries, and Max won't touch vegetables unless they're hidden in sauce." The details of motherhood, these small, intimate pieces of knowledge that parents carry, seemed incongruous coming from someone who had conspired to orphan her own children for money. They're fine, Claire. I remember their likes and dislikes. I've been their grandmother for 10 years. She flinched at the reminder of our prior relationship, the birthday parties, the Christmases, the family dinners, where I'd welcomed her as a daughter. What will happen to them? Jennifer's apartment is too small, and her job I'm taking them after I return from Ireland. I've already spoken to a family attorney about temporary guardianship. Relief and something like jealousy flashed across Claire's face. You're still going to Ireland? Even with all this? Yes, the trip is paid for and I need the time to think to prepare for what comes next. Jennifer will keep them until I return. Claire's eyes narrowed slightly. Always so practical, Margaret. Always so in control. There it was, the resentment that had simmered beneath the surface of our relationship for years. The perception that my competence was somehow a criticism of her choices, that my independence was a rejection of her dependence on my son. Not always in control, Claire, just learning to adapt to circumstances I never created or wanted. Like raising my grandchildren because their parents conspired to defraud me. She had the grace to look ashamed, her gaze dropping to her hands. How long will you have them? As long as necessary. The attorney says with the evidence against you and David, you're both looking at significant sentences. 5 to 10 years potentially. 10 years, Lily will be 18. I nodded, the weight of what that meant hanging between us. I would be raising her children through their entire adolescence. I would be the one helping with homework, attending school functions, guiding them through the turbulent teenage years. I would be their mother in all but name. Will you tell them what we did? Not the worst of it. Not yet. They're too young to understand why the people who should have protected them most were willing to destroy another life for money. But I won't lie if they ask direct questions. Claire leaned forward, suddenly intense. Promise me you won't turn them against us. Promise me they'll still know us as their parents. The request seemed audacious given the circumstances. Yet I understood the fear behind it, the terror of being erased from your children's lives, of becoming a cautionary tale rather than a beloved memory. I'll make sure they know you love them. The rest will depend on your actions going forward, what kind of relationship you try to maintain from here, how you treat them during visitations, whether you ever take responsibility for the choices that separated you from them. Our time expired before Claire could respond. As she was led away, she turned back, once her expression a complex mixture of gratitude and resentment. The door closed behind her with a metallic finality that echoed through the visiting area. Sarah entered next, her appearance the most dramatically altered. My daughter, always so polished and put together, looked diminished in every way. She'd lost weight, her cheekbones jutting sharply beneath pallid skin. Her hair, usually styled precisely, hung limp around her face. But it was her eyes that had changed most, the calculating intelligence replaced by a haunted wariness that aged her beyond her years. She nearly dropped the phone in her haste to speak. Mom, thank you for coming. My lawyer said you wouldn't, that after everything. I cut her off gently. I'm not here because your lawyer asked me to come. I'm making decisions about Max and Lily, and I felt I should inform all of you in person. Sarah blinked, confusion crossing her features. Max and Lily. But they're David's kids, their family, Sarah. They need someone and I'm in a position to help them. That's good of you. It's not about being good. It's about doing what's necessary. She fidgeted with the coiled phone cord. Have they told you about my deal? I'm cooperating with the prosecution. I've told them everything, how Tom orchestrated it all, how he pressured me, how I never wanted to hurt you. The words tumbled out in a desperate stream, her eyes pleading for understanding, for absolution, for any sign that I might support her bid for leniency. Daniel Rivers mentioned it. He also showed me the text messages between you and Tom, the ones where you suggested having me declared incompetent, the ones where you discussed which psychiatric facilities would be most convenient for your schedule. Sarah's face crumpled. Mom, I was scared. Tom said if I didn't go along with it, he'd leave me. I'd take the kids. You don't know what he's like in private, how controlling. I held up my hand, stopping the flow of excuses. Sarah, listen carefully. I didn't come here to debate your level of culpability or to hear justifications. I came to tell you that I'm moving forward with my life. Part of that includes caring for Max and Lily. Part of it includes going to Ireland next week. And part of it includes accepting that the daughter I thought I had doesn't exist anymore, and maybe never did. Tears spilled down her cheeks, smearing the minimal makeup gel regulations allowed. That's not true. I do love you. I just made terrible mistakes. I studied her face, searching for any trace of the little girl who had once climbed into my lap with picture books, who had brought me dandelion bouquets, who had cried on my shoulder after her first heartbreak. The woman before me bore her features, but seemed like a stranger wearing a familiar mask. Love isn't something you feel only when it's convenient. Love isn't something you set aside when money enters the equation. Love is a choice you make every day in small actions and large ones. And for years, your choices have shown me exactly where I stand in your priorities. Her tears flowed freely now, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Can you ever forgive me? The question hung between us, fraught with implications. My answer could influence her career, her sentence, her future. More importantly, it would determine the nature of whatever relationship might remain possible between us. I already have forgiven you, Sarah. Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. It doesn't mean trust is restored or that relationships continue unchanged. It simply means I'm releasing the anger that would otherwise poison my future. What happens next depends entirely on you. The guard signaled our time was ending. Sarah clutched the phone tighter, desperation etching deeper lines around her mouth. Will you visit me again? I don't know. I honestly don't know what our relationship looks like going forward. For now, I need to focus on Max and Lily, on my trip, on rebuilding my life. She nodded, a small broken movement. Can I write to you at least? You can write. I may or may not respond right away, but I will read your letters. It was the most I could offer, a small opening, neither a promise of reconciliation nor a complete severance. Sarah would have to discover for herself whether she was capable of building something new from the ashes of what she'd destroyed. Tom was my final visit, entering the room with the confident stride of a man merely inconvenienced rather than incarcerated. Unlike the others, he showed little physical evidence of his month in jail. His jumpsuit somehow appeared pressed, his face cleanly shaved, his expression composed. He sat across from me, picking up the phone with a casual ease that suggested this was a normal business meeting, rather than a confrontation between a woman and the man who had orchestrated a conspiracy against her. Margaret, thank you for coming. Sarah mentioned you might visit. His tone was pleasant, conversational, as if we were meeting for coffee rather than separated by bulletproof glass in a county jail. I wanted to see all of you one last time. For closure. Closure. That sounds rather final. His smile didn't reach his eyes, which remained calculating, assessing. It is final, Tom. Whatever happens with your cases, whatever sentences you all receive, my relationship with you ends today. He leaned back slightly, studying me with the detached interest of a scientist observing a specimen. You know, Margaret, I've always admired your pragmatism. It's a quality Sarah unfortunately lacks. You see situations clearly without sentimentality clouding your judgment. The compliment, if it was intended as such, felt like an insult. Tom was still attempting to manipulate to establish common ground where none existed. Is that how you justified it? That I was pragmatic enough to understand why my children needed to speed along my demise for their financial benefit? His expression didn't change, but something hardened in his eyes. You're twisting my words. No one wanted you dead. The insurance policy was standard estate planning. The assisted living suggestions were for your benefit. The concerns about your competency were legitimate given your age and circumstances. Each justification emerged smooth and practiced, as if he'd rehearsed them in preparation for trial. I wondered briefly if he actually believed them, if he'd constructed a narrative in which he was the reasonable son-in-law looking out for family interests, rather than the architect of a conspiracy. Tom, stop. The text messages discussing accidents for people who travel alone. The meetings with a lawyer about having me declared incompetent. The $2 million insurance policy with double payment for accidental death. The recorded conversations about accessing my accounts before my final nap. The evidence is overwhelming and damning. He shrugged, the gesture dismissive. Conversations taken out of context. Dark humor misinterpreted. You'd be surprised what juries believe when presented with alternative explanations. His confidence was chilling, the absolute certainty that he could talk his way out of anything that rules applied to others but not to him, that consequences were for people less clever than himself. Maybe. But Robert's evidence doesn't require a jury's interpretation. The private investigator he hired documented everything from the moment you first suggested Sarah should understand her inheritance prospects better. The protection plan he put in place anticipated every move you made because men like you are ultimately predictable in your entitlement. For the first time, Tom's composure cracked. A muscle twitched near his eye, his knuckles whitening around the phone. That old man. Always interfering, always thinking he knew best. Even from the grave, he couldn't resist playing puppet master. The venom in his voice confirmed what I'd suspected, that Tom had resented Robert's influence, his success, his quiet authority. That perhaps his plan had been as much about erasing Robert's legacy as accessing my money. Robert knew men like you, Tom. Men who see other people as resources to be exploited rather than human beings to be respected. Men who mistake kindness for weakness and independence for vulnerability. He protected me from you because he understood exactly what you are. Tom's laugh held no humor. And what am I, Margaret? Please enlighten me with your amateur psychology. You're a man who has never earned anything honestly. A man who married my daughter for her family connections. A man who accumulated debt trying to maintain appearances because substance has always eluded you. A man so terrified of facing his own mediocrity that he was willing to destroy lives rather than admit failure. Each word landed like a physical blow. Tom's face flushed, then paled, his breathing becoming audible through the phone connection. You self-righteous bitch! You have no idea what I'm capable of. When I get out of here, save your threats, Tom. I recorded this entire conversation. Any words you speak now will simply add to your sentence. It was a bluff. Jail regulations prohibited recording devices, but Tom didn't know that. His mouth snapped shut, eyes darting to the guard positioned by the door. I leaned closer to the glass, my voice steady and clear. I came today to tell you that you failed. You tried to break me, to isolate me, to take everything that matters. Instead, you gave me clarity. You showed me exactly who deserves my time, my energy, my consideration, and who doesn't. So thank you for that unintended gift. I'll think of it when I'm enjoying my freedom in Ireland next week. I placed the phone back in its cradle and stood signaling to the guard that our visit was concluded. Tom remained frozen, the handset still pressed to his ear, his expression a mixture of rage and disbelief as I walked away without looking back. Outside, the summer sun felt impossibly bright after the institutional lighting of the jail. I drew a deep breath, filling my lungs with warm air scented with freshly cut grass and distant rain. Free. I was free in a way my children and their spouses were not free, to make choices, to travel, to build a new life from the wreckage of betrayal. James waited in his car at the curb window, rolled down concern evident in his expression. How did it go? I slid into the passenger seat, removing the visitor badge from my blouse. Better than expected. I said what I needed to say. And did they say what you needed to hear? I considered the question as James pulled away from the jail, the building diminishing in the rearview mirror. They said exactly what I expected them to say. David was remorseful but self-serving. Claire was concerned about the children, but still resentful of me. Sarah was desperate for forgiveness without taking full responsibility. And Tom was Tom, unrepentant, calculating, dangerous. James navigated through traffic heading toward my neighborhood. Do you think any of them will change? Truly change? The question echoed my own thoughts during each conversation. Was genuine redemption possible for people who had conspired so thoroughly against someone who loved them? Could trust ever be rebuilt from such complete betrayal? I don't know. Prison changes people, but not always for the better. Right now, I'm more concerned about Max and Lily than their parents' moral evolution. As we drove, I described my plans for the children, converting the guest room and office into bedrooms, enrolling them in the local school, finding a therapist to help them process the trauma of their parents' arrests and absence. James listened attentively occasionally, offering legal advice about the guardianship process or suggestions about resources for children in similar situations. His practical support grounded me, reminding me that while the emotional landscape might be complicated, the necessary steps forward were clear and achievable. We arrived at my house to find Helen from next door waiting on the porch, a casserole dish in hand and a concerned expression on her face. "Margaret, there you are. I've been trying to call you. There's been a development." My heart stuttered immediately, assuming the worst. Had something happened to the children? Had there been some legal complication with the case? Helen set the casserole on the porch railing and grasped my hands. "Tom tried to hang himself in his cell this morning right after your visit. They found him in time, but he's been transferred to the psychiatric unit at County General. The news hit like a physical blow, unexpected and jarring. Despite everything Tom had done, despite my anger and hurt, I hadn't wished death upon him. The thought that our conversation might have pushed him to such desperation sent a cold wave of guilt washing over me. James steadied me with a hand on my elbow. "This isn't your fault, Margaret. Tom is manipulating the situation, trying to create sympathy, possibly angling for an insanity defense." His words made logical sense, yet the emotional impact remained. Whatever Tom's motivations, the reality of someone attempting suicide after a conversation with me felt heavy, complicated. Impossible to simply dismiss as manipulation. "I need to sit down," I murmured, suddenly lightheaded. Helen and James helped me inside, setting up a makeshift council of support at my kitchen table. Helen made tea while James called the prosecutor to gather more information. I sat motionless, trying to process this latest development in what seemed an endless series of emotional earthquakes. The prosecutor confirms it was a staged attempt, James reported after his call. The guards were watching him because he's been manipulating fellow inmates. They intervened immediately. The psychiatric transfer is standard procedure, but he's already telling doctors it was a cry for help rather than a serious attempt. Relief flooded through me, followed quickly by anger at being manipulated yet again. Even from jail, Tom was finding ways to exert control to create drama to make himself the center of attention. "What does this mean for the case?" I asked, wrapping my hands around the teacup Helen had placed before me. James shrugged. "It complicates things slightly. His attorney will likely pursue a mental health angle, now arguing diminished capacity or temporary insanity. But the evidence remains overwhelming. At most, it might reduce his sentence slightly, if the psychiatric evaluation suggests genuine mental illness." Helen squeezed my shoulder gently. "Margaret, you can't let this derail your plans. Your trip is in 3 days. The children are counting on you when you return. This is just one more manipulation tactic from a man who's built his life on deception." Her practical perspective cut through the emotional fog. She was right. Tom's actions, whatever their true intent, couldn't be allowed to dictate my choices or derail the future I was carefully reconstructing. "You're right. I need to focus on what's important now. The children, the trip moving forward." The next 2 days passed in a flurry of final preparations. I visited Max and Lily at Jennifer's apartment, explaining again that I would be traveling but would return to bring them to live with me. Their reactions were mixed excitement about having their own rooms at Grandma's house, tempered by confusion about their parents' continued absence, and anxiety about another change in their young lives. Max, always the more serious child, had questions I struggled to answer. "But why can't we see Mom and Dad? Are they in jail forever? Did they do something really bad?" I sat with him on Jennifer's tiny balcony, seeking privacy for this difficult conversation. "They did something wrong, yes. Something that broke the law. They'll be in jail for a while, but not forever, and you'll be able to visit them once everything is settled." His small face scrunched with the effort of understanding adult complexities far beyond his years. "Was it because they needed money?" I heard Aunt Jennifer talking on the phone. She said they were drowning in debt, whatever that means. The perceptiveness of children never ceased to amaze me, their ability to absorb fragments of adult conversations and piece them together into surprisingly accurate pictures. Yes, partly. They made bad choices because they were worried about money, but that's not something you need to worry about, Max. My job is to make sure you and Lily are safe and cared for, no matter what. He nodded slowly, processing this information, with the serious concentration of a child trying to make sense of a world suddenly turned upside down. Will you get in trouble for the bad things they did? Will you have to go to jail too? The question revealed his deeper fear that I too might disappear, leaving him and Lily truly alone. I pulled him close, feeling his small body tense, then gradually relax against mine. No, sweetheart. I didn't do anything wrong, and I'm not going anywhere. Well, except to Ireland for 10 days. But then I'm coming straight back and we'll be together for a very long time. Promise, I promise. Such a simple word promise, yet weighted with implications, in a world where adult promises to Max had recently been revealed as fragile, breakable things. I silently vowed that my promises to these children would be different, solid, dependable foundations they could build their security upon. The day before my departure, I finalized arrangements with Jennifer for the children's care, confirmed my travel details, and completed the last-minute tasks that always precede a significant journey. James called with updates about the case. Tom had been returned to jail after psychiatric evaluation found no evidence of genuine suicidal intent. Sarah was continuing to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for consideration during sentencing, and the preliminary hearing was scheduled for after my return. That evening, I sat alone in my garden as twilight settled over Robert's roses, which had bloomed with unexpected vigor this year. Their scent filled the air, sweet and poignant, a living reminder of the man whose foresight had saved me from unimaginable harm. I wondered, not for the first time, if he somehow knew the depth of the betrayal our children were capable of, or if he had simply prepared for worst-case scenarios with his characteristic thoroughness. Somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower hummed, and children's voices carried on the evening breeze. Ordinary sounds of a neighborhood winding down for the night, remarkable only in their normalcy amidst the chaos my life had become. I closed my eyes, trying to imagine the Irish countryside I would soon see, the ancient stones and green hills Robert and I had planned to visit together. My phone vibrated with a text from Dr. Winters. Safe travels tomorrow. Remember our discussion about permission to enjoy beauty even in the midst of pain, to embrace joy without guilt, to live fully despite others' choices to remain trapped in their own limitations. Her words resonated deeply, articulating what I'd been struggling to give myself permission to move forward, without constant backward glances to experience pleasure, without feeling I was somehow betraying the gravity of recent events to claim my life as my own, rather than an appendage to my children's poor choices. The morning of departure arrived with unexpected serenity. I moved through final preparations, with calm efficiency, checking my passport, confirming my transportation to the airport, sending one last message to Jennifer about the children. Everything was in order. Everything was ready. Helen arrived to drive me to the airport, her station wagon already idling in my driveway, as I locked the front door behind me. The simple act of turning a key felt momentous, securing one chapter before opening another. I touched the doorframe briefly, a silent acknowledgement of the home I would return to changed in ways I couldn't yet imagine. You look different, Margaret Helen observed as we drove toward the airport. Lighter, somehow. I considered her words, testing them against my internal landscape. I feel different, like I've set down something heavy I didn't realize I was carrying. Helen navigated through morning traffic with practiced ease. That's what happens when you stop trying to fix people who don't want to be fixed. When you finally accept that some relationships can't be salvaged no matter how much love you pour into them. Her insight struck me as profoundly true. For months, years, perhaps I'd been trying to earn my children's authentic love to deserve their concern, rather than their calculation to be worthy of their loyalty, rather than their exploitation. I'd been working to fix a relationship that they had no interest in repairing. Investing in emotional connections they valued only for potential financial gain. Airport security passed in a blur of practiced motions, shoes off electronics in bins, patient progression through metal detectors and body scanners. I found myself oddly comforted by the ritualistic nature of it all, the predictable patterns that remained constant, despite the seismic shifts in my personal life. The waiting area at my gate was already filling with fellow travelers, many clearly part of the same tour group, based on their matching luggage tags. I spotted a woman approximately my age sitting alone, reading a guidebook to Ireland with focused attention. Something about her solitude mirrored my own, and I found myself moving toward the empty seat beside her. First time to Ireland, I asked, gesturing to her guidebook. She looked up momentarily startled, then smiled with genuine warmth. First time traveling anywhere alone, actually. My husband died last year, and I decided it was time to start doing the things we always planned together. The parallel to my own situation was so striking, I nearly gasped. I'm in exactly the same position. Widowed 3 years ago, first solo international trip. Her name was Catherine, she explained as we fell into easy conversation. She had been married for 42 years to a high school history teacher who had always dreamed of visiting the ancient sites of Ireland and Scotland. After his death from a heart attack, she had spent a year in grief before deciding to honor his memory by taking the trips they had planned together. "What about you?" she asked. "What brings you to Ireland alone?" The question was innocent conversational, yet it opened a door to complexities I wasn't sure how to navigate with a stranger. How much to share? How to explain the journey that had led me to this moment without burdening a new acquaintance with the full weight of betrayal and renewal? My late husband was a dentist, I began cautiously. We always planned to travel after he retired, but cancer had other ideas. The past few months have been challenging in ways I never expected. This trip is part journey, part escape, part new beginning. Catherine nodded, understanding evident in her expression. The hardest part of widowhood isn't the grief, she observed quietly. It's discovering who you are without them, finding your shape as an individual when you've been part of a pair for so long. Her words captured exactly what I'd been experiencing, the disorienting process of rediscovering myself as Margaret, not as Robert's wife or David and Sarah's mother or Max and Lily's grandmother. Just Margaret with her own desires, preferences, and choices. Our boarding call interrupted the conversation, but Catherine and I discovered we were seated in the same row. Another coincidence that felt somehow significant, as if the universe were providing companionship for this journey into the unknown. As the plane lifted off American soil, I gazed out the window at the diminishing landscape below. Somewhere down there were my children in their jail cells, my grandchildren in their temporary home, the house that had witnessed both betrayal and resilience. They grew smaller with each passing second, not disappearing but gaining perspective, becoming part of a larger picture rather than the entirety of my vision. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to feel genuine excitement about what lay ahead, not just the Irish landscapes and historic sites, but the discovery of who Margaret Thompson might become in this next chapter of her life. The woman who had stood firm against betrayal, the woman who had protected herself when those who should have cherished her had instead conspired against her. The woman who was choosing to move forward with grace rather than bitterness, with purpose rather than defeat. 10 days in Ireland would not erase the pain of recent months. Returning to assume guardianship of Max and Lily would bring new challenges and responsibilities. The legal proceedings against my children would continue requiring my testimony and presence. The road ahead remained complex and demanding. But in this moment suspended between worlds, I felt a profound certainty that I was equal to whatever challenges awaited. Robert had known it even when I doubted myself. He had seen my strength, my resilience, my capacity to rebuild from ashes. His final gift had not been the financial protection or legal safeguards, but the unwavering belief in my ability to stand alone if necessary. Catherine's voice broke into my thoughts. I read somewhere that the Irish have a beautiful concept called thin places, spots, where the boundary between heaven and earth feels especially thin. Places where the distance between what is and what could be seems to dissolve. I've always thought that grief creates its own thin places in our lives, moments where we glimpse possibilities we couldn't see before. Her observation resonated deeply with my own experience, the strange alchemy by which profound loss had somehow created openings for new growth, new connections, new perspectives. The betrayal that had intended to destroy me had instead cleared away illusions, leaving space for a clearer, more authentic existence. "I think you're right," I replied, though I never expected to find gratitude in the midst of such pain. Catherine smiled, wisdom evident in the fine lines around her eyes. "That's the great mystery, isn't it? How light eventually finds its way through even the deepest cracks in our lives, not erasing them, but illuminating them, making them part of the beauty rather than only sources of pain." As our plane crossed the Atlantic, I thought of Max and Lily waiting for my return, of the home I would create for them, of the lessons in resilience I could offer from my own experience. I thought of the roses blooming in my garden, persistent and beautiful despite seasons of neglect. I thought of Robert, whose love continued to protect me long after his physical presence had ended. Most of all, I thought about the woman I was becoming, not despite the betrayal, but because of it. Stronger at the broken places, wiser through disillusionment, more compassionate through suffering, more authentic through the stripping away of pretense and false security. The ocean passed beneath us, vast and changing, separating what had been from what would be. Like me, it contained depths, unseen currents of power beneath a surface that reflected both darkness and light. Like me, it endured storms without being diminished by them. Like me, it remained fundamentally itself, while constantly in motion, constantly being renewed. 7 hours later, our plane began its descent toward Dublin Airport. Catherine and I exchanged contact information, promising to meet for dinner during our stay, to compare notes on our adventures. The flight attendant announced local time and temperature, reminding us to adjust our watches. Simple instructions for transitioning between worlds. As the wheels touched down on Irish soil, I felt something settle within me, a quiet certainty that had been elusive for months. I had survived the unimaginable. I had protected myself when those closest to me had become my greatest threat. I had found clarity in betrayal and strength in vulnerability. Whatever challenges awaited back home, raising my grandchildren, testifying against my children, rebuilding a life from the wreckage of broken trust, I would face them with the same dignity and resilience that had carried me through the darkest days. Robert had known it all along. Trust isn't like a broken vase you can glue back together. Once shattered, the cracks remain visible, permanent reminders of vulnerability and repair. But those cracks don't diminish the vessel's worth or purpose. They become part of its history, its character, its unique beauty. I collected my luggage and moved through customs, stepping out into the misty Irish morning, as a woman transformed not by crossing an ocean, but by navigating the treacherous waters of betrayal and emerging on the other side not unscathed but undefeated. Not unchanged, but authentically, powerfully myself. A taxi waited to take me to my hotel, the driver cheerfully loading my suitcase, while commenting on the weather, the traffic, the growing tourist season. Ordinary conversation in an extraordinary moment, the beginning of 10 days that would mark the boundary between what had been and what would be. As Dublin's streets unfolded before me, I felt a smile forming, genuine, unforced, perhaps the first truly uncomplicated expression of joy I'd experienced in months, the smile of a woman who had discovered her own worth not through others' validation, but through the fire of their betrayal, the smile of a woman who had learned that sometimes losing what you thought you had reveals what can never be taken from you: your dignity, your strength, your capacity to begin again. Ireland stretched before me, green and ancient and new all at once. Beyond it waited Max and Lily, their young lives now entrusted to my care. Beyond them lay whatever relationship might be salvaged with my children after their incarceration, whatever healing might be possible in the years to come. But today, this moment belonged to me alone. Today, I would walk cobblestone streets Robert and I had planned to explore together. Today I would stand at the edge of the Atlantic and feel the spray of waves that had witnessed centuries of human grief and joy, loss and renewal. Today, I would begin the rest of my life not as a victim of betrayal, but as a woman who had transformed betrayal into liberation. The taxi pulled up to my hotel, a charming building with window boxes full of bright flowers. The driver unloaded my suitcase, wished me a pleasant stay. I tipped him generously, experiencing the simple pleasure of financial decisions made without justification or explanation to anyone. Inside the hotel lobby welcomed me with warm wood paneling and the scent of fresh-baked scones. The clerk checked me in, efficiently explaining breakfast hours and local attractions. A normal interaction, beautifully ordinary in its lack of emotional complexity. My room overlooked a small courtyard garden, where early morning light illuminated dew-covered roses, climbing a stone wall. Roses like Robert's, persistent and beautiful, in their determined blooming. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Like those roses, I too was flowering in unexpected seasons, finding beauty after winter thriving, in spite of perhaps because of the challenges that might have destroyed a less resilient spirit. I unpacked methodically, arranging my belongings in the unfamiliar dresser drawers and closet. Robert's emerald scarf lay atop my sweaters, a splash of familiar color in this new environment. I lifted it briefly to my face, no longer searching for his scent, but simply acknowledging his continued presence in my journey. Then I opened the heavy drapes, fully letting Irish sunlight flood the room, illuminating corners that had been in shadow. The metaphor wasn't subtle, but it was powerful nonetheless. Light finding its way into darkened spaces, revealing what had been hidden, transforming what had been feared. I was ready. Ready for this day, for this journey, for whatever lay beyond it. Ready to embrace joy without guilt, to experience beauty without qualification, to live fully despite, or perhaps because of the betrayal that had intended to diminish me. The woman who had entered a county jail visiting room yesterday was not the same woman who now stood in an Irish hotel room gazing out at a garden she had crossed an ocean to see. The woman who had confronted her children's betrayal was not the same woman who would return to care for their children. The woman who had been seen as nothing but a financial resource to be exploited was not the same woman who now saw herself as everything she needed to be. In the garden below, an elderly gardener tended the roses with careful attention, pruning away dead growth to encourage new flowering. Another metaphor equally unsubtle, but no less true. Sometimes the greatest growth comes after the sharpest cuts. Sometimes what appears to be loss is actually the necessary preparation for abundance. I checked my watch, calculating the time difference. In America, Max and Lily would be preparing for school, Jennifer helping them with backpacks and lunches. In the county jail, my children would be waking to another day of consequences. In my garden at home, Robert's roses would be opening to morning sunlight. And here in Ireland, Margaret Thompson was beginning again. Not from scratch, but from wisdom dearly bought and deeply integrated. Not alone, but in the company of her own newly discovered strength. Not diminished by betrayal, but expanded by the clarity it had reluctantly provided. I picked up the hotel phone and ordered breakfast to be delivered to my room, a small luxury I would once have considered unnecessary, even frivolous. Today, it felt like a declaration of independence, a statement of self-worth, a recognition that I deserved small pleasures simply because I existed, not because I had earned them through service to others. While waiting for my meal, I sat by the window watching the gardener work, admiring his patient attention to each plant. He moved with the unhurried confidence of someone who understands that growth follows its own timeline, that forcing blooms before their season yields only weak flowers that quickly fade. I would try to remember that wisdom when I returned home to Max and Lily. Their healing, like mine, would follow its own timeline. Their trust, like the roses, would bloom when ready, not when demanded. Their future, like Ireland, stretching beyond my window, contained possibilities I could glimpse, but not fully envision from where I stood today. A knock at the door announced my breakfast. I opened it to find a young woman with a covered tray and a welcoming smile. The simple human connection, her greeting my thanks, the brief exchange about weather and travel felt significant in its normalcy, a reminder that most interactions aren't laden with manipulation or betrayal. As I ate beside the window, savoring unfamiliar flavors of Irish breakfast, I made a silent promise to myself to remain open to connection, despite betrayal to risk trust, despite deception to choose life in all its messy complexity rather than retreat into self-protective isolation. My children's actions had shown me the worst of human potential, but I refused to let that become my only truth. Outside, morning light strengthened, burning away lingering mist to reveal Dublin's spires and rooftops, stretching toward the distant hills. Somewhere beyond the city lay ancient stones and green fields, thin places where heaven and earth drew close boundaries, between past and future dissolved, and new possibilities revealed themselves to those willing to see. I was willing, ready, open to whatever lessons this journey might offer, not just the external travels through Irish landscapes, but the internal exploration of who Margaret Thompson might become when freed from others' expectations and manipulations. Finishing my meal, I gathered my guidebook, camera, and room key. The day beckoned, full of sights to explore, experiences to absorb, moments to collect like precious stones that would sustain me through whatever challenges awaited back home. I stepped into the hotel corridor, closing my door firmly behind me. Another threshold crossed another boundary between what had been and what might be. Ahead lay Dublin's streets, Ireland's countryside, and beyond them a future I was finally ready to claim as entirely my own.